Animus Training School Horthomos. Claire listened with great interest to the history class of the surface world. Why is the surface world so interesting? It is certainly barbaric and brutal, as Dad said, but it's also really interesting because they're living dramatic lives so desperately. Claire couldn't understand why people on the surface hated each other, and fought and stole from each other. But that just piqued Claire's interest, even more. After class, Claire immediately called out Ramal. Why don't we go to the Tios? I want to go to the library and see the surface world. I'm not allowed by Dad, though, Claire said with flushed cheeks and an excited look on her face. It seems curiosity got the better of her than following her father's instructions. In the first place, even learning about the history of the surface world was a secret from her father. So going to the library now to see what the surface world was like would same thing. That's probably what Claire was thinking, Ramal thought. And let's have dinner at Cortania for the first time in a while. Ramal knew that the suggestion was meant to draw Ramal in and frame him as guilty. She intends to avoid being the only one to blame if her father finds out and gets angry. Either way, Ramal had no choice. Claire's suggestion was not a suggestion, but an order. Besides, Ramal was happy to be able to have dinner in Cortania. With no reason nor any right to refuse, Ramal nodded and transformed into a dragon in the schoolyard. When Pharos and Elandra stepped out of the gaping hole, a large, clear blue lake spreads below them. And far ahead, there was an island filled with huge structures floating on the lake. The island, filled with shining silver buildings, looks as if a city had been carved out of a giant iceberg. The light of the guiding stone had disappeared without a trace, but Elandra was still flying slowly towards the city.
Where the hell is here?
Pharos asked, his eyes glued to the incredible sight. Between the buildings constructed in the city, roads paved with crystals were stretched in every direction. And strange vehicles traveled at high speeds on them. Furthermore, in the center of the city, there is a huge tower that stretches high into the sky. It's the Tios. It's one of the underground cities, and it's the third largest city in this world.
Underground city? What do you mean?
Elandra remained silent without answering Pharos' question. Before Elandra's eyes was a huge black dragon approaching at breakneck speed. The dragon came to a sudden halt in front of them. The sheer size of the dragon was incomparable to that of Elandra. That is like the difference between a horse and a goat. There's a man stood on the dragon's back. The man holds the reins that are attached to the dragon's body. Judging from his appearance, the man was about the same age as Pharos, around 20 years old. His hair was cut long enough to reach his ears, and his eyes were silver as he gazed intently at Pharos. His skin was white and his features were so beautiful that at first glance it was difficult to tell if he was male or female. He was wearing white clothes from head to toe, with a blue cloak over them. On his feet, he wears long boots that reach up to his knees.
Welcome to the Tios.
A young man's voice echoed in Pharos' head. Apparently it wasn't the dragon that spoke, but the man riding on it. The dragon doesn't seem particularly interested and looks away.
You seem you have come from the surface world. Please enjoy your time here. If you experience any inconvenience, please feel free to contact one of our staff in the central area.
After saying that, the man turned around and headed back the way he had come.
What was that?
Pharos didn't understand the man's intention. It was just a greeting. It was meant as a warning, you see. In other words, by calling out to the people coming this way, it was meant to let them know that the people in the center are constantly watching over them. Anyway, there's nothing to worry about. With that answer, Elandra continued flying in the sky again in silence. Above the city, people were flying through the sky on dragons everywhere. Dragons came in all sizes and colors. Similarly, all the dragon riders had different skin and hair colors and wore different clothing. Some were heading to the city, others flying away from the city to somewhere else, all flying freely through the sky as they pleased. The city was uniformly white, with green parks scattered here and there, and neatly laid out like the lines of a dice. There were many people on the streets, and boat-like vehicles that seemed to float in the air were frequently seen running on the crystal-paved roads. However, there was no noise and the city was very quiet. Finding a square in a corner of the city, Elandra began her descent. It was a large almond-shaped square surrounded by water. The square is covered with marble, and a fountain rises from the pond in the center.
Come on, get off.
Elandra crouched down as she landed on the square. The people there didn't seem to mind the dragon landing in the square, as if it was nothing unusual. As soon as Pharos jumped off Elandra's back, she instantly shifted to human form. From her noble and beautiful appearance, Pharos thought again that it was hard to imagine the formidable-looking dragon from earlier.
Let's sit over there,
said Elandra, pointing to a strange object floating in front of the fountain. It was like a flat, transparent frying pan, or something like a crystal cut into a circle with a gentle depression in the center. There were many of them lined up in a row floating at knee-high.
They are Kuteya,
Elandra said, as Pharos looked at the object curiously. Pharos looked up and down and front and back and side to side at the chair, which was called Kuteya, wondering if it was being held up by some invisible thread or something. However, they were not suspended from anything, but rather each one was floating in the air by itself. The rows of slightly whitish transparent Kuteya looked like upside-down jellyfish floating in the air. Elandra sat down on one of them, next to Pharos, who had his arms crossed. Kuteya sank slightly, but quickly returned to its original height and was floating in the air with Elandra on. Following her, Pharos sat down next to Elandra. It felt as though he was sitting on a floating bag. When Pharos lifted his feet off the ground and shook his hips up and down and side to side, the Kuteya also shook up and down and side to side at the same time. Then, he tried to put his feet on the ground and kicked the ground backwards while still on top of Kuteya. However, after only a slight movement forward, Kuteya returned to its original position. No matter how many times he tried, it was the same. Even so, Pharos thought as he sat back down on Kuteya.
What a technologically advanced city this is.
The area is filled with huge, towering buildings, and transparent crystal roads run between them, both above and below. Like blood vessels, and above them float boats. No other country Pharos has ever seen had a city with such technology. And yet, it's so quiet. It was far removed from the hustle and bustle that is found in most cities. People are having conversations in their heads, so there's no voice what is being said. The only thing been heard was the chirping of birds. And in the silence, their chirping, like that of a harp, was very pleasant to his ears. And the weather was mild. Neither cold nor hot. The air is so clear it's as if it's been filtered of impurities. Occasionally, a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of trees and flowers. Contrary to the first impression of Pharos when he saw the city, it is relaxed and it feels as if time passes slowly. Then suddenly, Pharos thought,
How much time had passed since I had come here from the old woman's cottage?
Pharos looked up to the sky to determine the position of the sun, and was shocked. The sun was blue-white. It was very bright but not dazzling, so he could look directly at it. Pharos stood up and looked around the sky. But there were no stars in the light blue sky except for the blue-white sun. Elandra said to Pharos, who had a puzzled look on his face.
It's the central sun, that's the sun of this world.
Now that I think about it, you said earlier that this was an underground city, but are you really saying that this is directly beneath the world we live in?
Pharos asked, sitting on the kuteya again. Elandra nodded silently.
So it's underground?
Elandra nodded again. The old woman told Pharos to go as deep as he could. However, he never imagined that such a world existed beneath the world he lived in.
There are many other cities like this. They're not well known in your world, though.
Pharos had been to many countries, but when he heard that, he realized how narrow his perspectives were. Pharos wondered if anyone else on Earth knew this fact.